especially like over summer and most people's day off. I don't totally know what to call this because it isn't really a book launch since the book's been out for a bit, but just a book celebration, and getting to see a lot of people who I care about is really lovely, and thank you all so much. This is my first book, and I had and have no idea what I'm doing, so all of your support has been lovely. I'm going to read a short story. I shouldn't hold you hostage for more than like 15 minutes. The title piece for this collection, You Shouldn't Worry About the Frogs. So it says, You Shouldn't Worry About the Frogs. Something needed to be done about all of the croaking. It was the middle of the night, those few precious hours between work and class where I could settle in long enough to think, or maybe even sleep. At least I would try if it wasn't for the frogs. They should have been hibernating or dead and eaten already. It was too late in the season for frogs. When I first moved in, it was early summer and they'd just been tadpoles, sitting in the murky still water of our courtyard's fountain. I figured they would get picked off by a bird or something. But a few survived and now they never leave the fountain. They sit there with their constant croaking, just loud enough to break through any train of thought or distract from any activity I might try. I stared up at my ceiling from where I laid on my mattress and ran a hound down my face. This was just another painful reminder that I could have lived in a dorm, around other people and already built furniture. Instead, here I was, in the only part of the city I could afford, with a shoebox studio to call my very own. My mattress was still on the floor, the bed frame in a box somewhere around here, my books stacked up on a wall next to another box that contained my desk, and my clothes would still be packed in my duffel bag if I hadn't worn them and left them strewn around the floor. The apartment was on the ground level, in a brick building covered in peeling yellow paint with a courtyard view that never shut up. A particularly loud croak cut through the brief silence, and I groaned back loudly. Enough was enough. I got out of bed and picked up an empty takeout box from last night. I grabbed my keys and headed outside. It was cold out and I was barefoot, wearing the pajamas Mom got me for Christmas last year, the ones with bunnies all over them. Luckily, no one was around to see. I marched over to the fountain that sat at the courtyard center, surrounded by neglected plants. It was made of crumbling cement with moss overtaking most of what was left. Old rainwater was collected in the base where the frogs sat. All 5 of them stopped croaking as I approached. They didn't scatter or even move. They just sat there staring at me. All right, listen up, I said. One night. Tomorrow, I'm going to find a spot for you, a nice park or something. Then you will stay there and I will get some sleep, understand? I glared down at the frogs. One croaked and the others joined back in. It sounded enough like an agreement. I got down and scooped them up and into my takeout container. They went in without a fight. Before I could close the lid, the iron gate creaked behind me and I whipped around to see the door swinging open. I scrambled up from where I kneeled in the dirt and ran back inside with the frogs cradled in my arms. Shutting the front door to my section of the building, I peeked through the window. One frog jumped and I caught it with my hand, pushed it back down into the container. Quiet, I whispered to the frog. 1 second. I peered from behind the curtains at the figure coming through the courtyard. I never could quite figure out Maggie's work schedule. She was always coming and going with a backpack on one shoulder and a canvas bag on the other. She was some sort of waitress, judging by the uniform, but I didn't know where. I imagined it was one of those places that stayed open late and served pancakes to truckers. We'd met once, the first day I moved in. She stopped to help me with a box of pots and pans I had dropped. Her name tag said Margaret, but she wrinkled her nose and insisted anyone under 50 should just call her Maggie. I barely said a word to her, too stressed out and unsure what to say. Here we were, already starting fall semester, and I was still waiting for a good time to introduce myself again. She seemed about my age, another girl living alone. We already had things in common. Maybe she would want to get coffee sometime. But hiding behind a door in pajamas with a fried rice carton full of frogs is probably not the time to ask. I watched Maggie walk through the courtyard, stopping to peek into the fountain. She stayed there for a minute before she opened the door across the square from mine and went inside. Maggie's apartment was directly across from mine, and I knew from experience that pretty soon her light would be on and I'd be able to see right in. I turned my attention back to the wet, croaking box in my hands. I quickly went back to my own apartment, flicking on my own lights. I rushed past the window into the bathroom. I dumped the container of frogs into my tub and ran the faucet until they had a good amount of water. There were a couple clumps of moss stuck to my shirt. I plucked them off and dropped them into the bath with the frogs. All of them were still and quiet, taking in their surroundings. They were a bit small, but all were bright green and seemed healthy enough for living in a gross fountain. Be good. I waved a finger threateningly at them. I'll be back to check on you. In the kitchen, I opened up the fridge to look over my poor offerings. I doubted frogs were supposed to eat peanut butter, pickles, or eggs. Actually, I had no idea what they ate besides bugs. I still hadn't called to get my internet fixed, so there was no way of searching for it. It would be fine. As soon as the sun was up, I'd go take them to the park down the street. They could live in a big pond and have all the bugs and whatever else they wanted. For now, I washed the sticky feeling of cardboard off my hands. I was too wound up to sleep, so I put a mug of water in the microwave and resolved to finally finish unpacking. While my water was heating up, I heard a thud from outside, and I walked over to my window to look out. Across the courtyard, Maggie had opened up her window and was shaking out a blanket. I stepped back so she wouldn't see me watching her finish, and turned back out of view, leaving the window open. Everything in her apartment was colorful. I could see the edge of her kitchen counter, wrapped in a strand of fairy lights, purple and yellow bowls sitting on top filled with grapes and apples. On the wall was a tapestry of woven threads and yarn, not making any specific picture, just an explosion of color spreading across the wall and dripping down to rest on top of her couch, which was a bright velvety teal. She had lime green curtains, which were pushed aside most days, so I could see her walk back and forth with a steaming mug or a bag of chips in her hand. My own apartment was blank, perfectly white walls and a dark wood floor covered in scratches and dust buried between layers of lacquer. My worn red comforter thrown over my mattress was the only pop of color besides my scattered mugs and dirty clothes. I had left most of my stuff at home. When I thought I'd be staying in a dorm, I figured it wasn't worth the hassle, packing everything up, moving it in, doing it all again in a year. Except now, being in my own space, it felt so empty all the time. Sort of like I was melting into the blankness, like one day I'd wake up and find myself just another piece of dust glued onto the floor. I wondered what Maggie thought when she looked in here, or if she ever did. Back home, my room was covered in posters and half-finished paintings made at sleepovers. My window was taped from where it had cracked during a bad winter. When I looked out, I could see the woods and the tall grasses that covered them coming up to my waist when I went out for walks. The only grass around here was flooded and muddy from the rain we've been having. The microwave dinged. I dissolved a spoonful of instant coffee into my mug, then got to work building my desk. I was roughly halfway through when soft croaking erupted from the bathroom. I ripped off a chunk of cardboard and went to check on the frogs. They were still sitting in the tub, staring up at me. I placed the cardboard in the tub so it floated. A makeshift lily pad. Here, you guys have pool toys now. One frog hopped on it immediately. It looked up at me, puffing out its chest and croaking loudly. Yeah, you're welcome, but don't get too comfortable. The frog hopped back into the water, leaving a small clump of moss behind. There was actually a considerable amount of moss in my tub now. It almost looked like it was covering the bottom. How did a few frogs track in that much crap? I'd have to remember to pick up some shower cleaner after going to the park, and some groceries. With the frogs hopefully entertained, I continued to rustle with my desk. I could still hear croaking from the bathroom, but the door muffled most of it. Faint music came from outside, probably Maggie, since we seemed to be the only people up so late. I sat up on my knees and took another peek out my window. Maggie had her hair wrapped up in a towel and a nightshirt on, her bare legs sticking out. She was swaying side to side, mouthing the words to a song playing. I didn't recognize it. Maggie turned towards the window and I dropped down onto my mattress to avoid being caught. I should just stand up and wave. Say hi. Do you know much about frogs? Seems like we both stay up late. Would you like to get some coffee? It would be nice to have a friend here. Most of my classes were in huge rooms filled with people who all seemed to have their groups made up. The girl who had the desk shift on campus before me was nice, but she never stuck around long to talk. After I unpacked and got my place looking a little less awful, maybe I could invite Maggie over. I could buy a poster and stick it up on the wall, right where she could see it through the window. Then at least I'd have an icebreaker. I turned back to my desk, but saw that another clump of moss was stuck to the side of one panel. I must still have some on me. It wouldn't peel off either. I'd need to scrub it with something. I really thought I had gotten all the moss off. But looking down, I saw there was still a spread of it on my shirt, gross and damp. I got some paper towels wet under the sink and started rubbing the moss away. It seemed like no matter how hard I scrubbed it, it wouldn't come off. What the hell was this stuff? Some sort of mutant frog residue? I stopped trying to wipe and just took the shirt off to go find another from my floor. My desk, which moments before had only one small clump on the side, was now completely covered. Squishy green fuzz coated it like I'd pulled it right out of the bog. The moss was spreading. I ran back to my bathroom and threw open the door. My bathtub was overgrown with the stuff. I couldn't see any porcelain. There were whole vines, too, dangling from my shower rod, wrapping around and poking through my curtain. I had no idea where they had rooted. 3 of the frogs were still sitting in the tub, unbothered by the shifting surroundings. The other 2 were sitting in the sink, which was now also filled with water, despite both taps being turned off. It had a yellow, marshy top to it that was sloshing onto the floor. The frogs were all still croaking. I backed up and shut the door. I shut my eyes and squeezed them tightly. Okay? Okay. There was not a marsh in my bathroom. I had only been gone about half an hour. I was obviously hallucinating from lack of sleep and stress, or there was a gas leak, or my Thai food had been drugged with hallucinogens. All I had to do was take a deep breath, clear my mind, and open the door. I pressed my forehead to the frame, taking one last deep breath. I grabbed the doorknob firmly and pulled. Cold water rushed past me into the hallway, sloshing over my feet. With it came a few small silver-scaled fish and clumps of uprooted ferns and grass. Inside the bathroom, cattails and ferns had sprung up, surrounding what used to be my tub. Water was overflowing from the sink and winding its way between plants like a river out into my hallway. The bathroom floor was covered in mud and moss and the roots of trees, whole trees, in my bathroom, that pushed up against the ceiling and formed a canopy of dense green leaves. More vines wrapped around my vanity lights and the door dangling down into my face. The frogs were croaking loudly from somewhere inside, but I couldn't see them anymore. The sound was joined by buzzing dragonflies that had begun circling the room. I backed up and slipped on the wet floor, landing on my butt in the shallow swamp. My whole apartment was going to flood if I couldn't figure out how to stop this. There were no taps running, but I could see that the water was still coming. I shut the door again firmly and squashed back into my living room in my wet shorts and tank top. My phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, drying unharmed. The moss from my desk had spread across the floor. Already my mattress had been swallowed by a mass of weeds and roots. There was a thin layer of boggy water steadily rising around me, with tall grasses springing up along my walls. A frog hopped up onto the counter, startling me into dropping my phone into the now shin-deep water. I watched as what looked like a catfish swam by and swallowed it whole. The frog croaked once before hopping down. There were a couple more frogs swimming. One was resting on a piece of driftwood that was floating near my mattress. I looked back towards the bathroom and heard the same muffled croaking as before. I stumbled my way towards the front door. Cattails brushed against my legs and I pushed them away. A small brown bird landed on top of one of them, eyeing some of the beetles that were floating in the water below. It chirped shrilly at me and I backed away. I pulled open the door and stepped into the hallway, slamming it shut again behind me before too much water could escape. Thank God I didn't have downstairs neighbors. It didn't look like anything was leaking out. I felt around the bottom of the door and pressed my ear against it, listening for any wildlife or rushing water, but couldn't hear anything through the wood. My legs were soaked, and my shorts were dripping onto the hall carpet. I tried to wipe off any clumps of moss and grass that had stuck to me. They fell to the floor and stayed, not growing any further. I looked back at my apartment, hand hovering over the door once more before dropping it. I walked back down the hall and around the corner, shaky legs and damp, bare feet. I knew I'd found the right door. It had polka dot wrapping paper taped all over it with a plastic glittery welcome mat. I rapped my knuckles softly against the door. Maggie pulled it open. She was in her nightshirt with dots of acne cream dabbed on her face. She stared at me. "You live across the square from me, right?" she asked eventually. "Yeah," I replied. "I'm Sylvia." "Right, what's up? Is it raining again or something? You're like super wet." "Can I come in?" I asked. Maggie's eyebrows shot up. "I know it's really late. I've had sort of a weird night." "Okay, yeah." We continued to stand in the hall staring at each other. Maggie shifted on the balls of her feet. "Come on in." She moved to the side and I walked past her, careful not to brush her with my damp arm. The wood floor was similar to mine, but Maggie's was covered in mismatched rugs, and the plain walls were hidden by bookcases littered with trinkets from a tambourine to a collection of small porcelain houses. I stood stiffly in the entrance, hoping I wasn't dripping too badly onto her pretty rugs. "Here, 1 second." Maggie seemed to notice my discomfort. She disappeared around the corner and came back with a yellow fluffy towel she handed to me. "Thank you." "Sure, here, dry off. I'll make some popcorn?" "That'd be great, thanks." I rubbed the towel over my legs, arms, and then hair. "Hey, do you like coffee?" I raised my head up from toweling off my hair. Maggie was smiling at me, waiting for a reply. I realized she'd wiped off her acne cream. "Yeah, coffee is good, thanks," again. Maggie nodded and moved away to rummage around in her cabinets. I held my used towel tightly in my arms. Across the room, Maggie's window looked out onto the courtyard, same as mine did. I peered out at the dark square of grass and the empty, silent fountain in the center. The lights in my apartment were still on, creating a glowing spot of empty white wall. I couldn't see anything else. No birds, no vines, no rising water. Maggie's coffee maker beeped, startling me away from my absorption in the scene. She called me over to pick out a mug and I went, begrudgingly, turning away from the window. I left it open, letting in the sounds of cars rushing past outside and the distant sound of croaking. Thank you all so much for coming and letting me read one of my stories. I wanted to give a couple minutes in case anybody had any questions for me. Not that there's any pressure or I told anybody that they should come ready with questions.
What was Sylvia on?
Thai food.
What inspired you to write your first book?
I'd always wanted to write a book. I sort of fell into writing short stories because a professor in college told me that instead of agonizing over novels, I should write short stories because that was a better way to build up publishing credits.
Nice.
So I started writing short stories and it turned out I really liked it.
Which one's your favorite in the book?
I think Buried in the Steep is my favorite one. For people who've had a chance to read the book, you might be familiar. People who have not read the book, Buried in the Steep is about a chicken line worker whose coworker goes missing. It was a struggle because my protagonist and the voice of the story is a middle-aged woman, and I really didn't want her to sound like a 25-year-old writing a middle-aged woman. I wanted her to sound authentic. So if you read the story, let me know how I did. Thank you all so much for coming. I'll be around to sign books and chat and things, but yeah, thank you all so much for being here. There's no pressure to stay for any amount of time. It's really so lovely to see you all.